It is May 28th, 2025, and both Russia and China are once again calling the US out over the Trump administration's plans to build a space based missile defense shield that they're calling the Golden Dome, with countries like Russia and China warning that it will weaponize space like never before. This also comes amid the latest reports, the revelations, if you will, that the US actually has around 500 troops on the ground in Taiwan. That's also coming as you have Germany talking about the West removing restrictions on the use of long range weapons, they say by Ukraine, but really by them to target Russian territory. And while the Trump administration isn't doing much more publicly than Trump's latest statement saying that, oh, he'll give Russia 2 more weeks, or threatening Putin on social media, it's also not denying any of these latest reports about the ways in which it is increasing tensions. We're going to be getting into all of the latest here in today's video, but before we do, Mr. Jax is here. He wanted to say hi. He really just wants a treat. But would you like a treat? Okay, we'll get one in just a second. But before we get to that, he also wants to remind y'all that your support makes my work possible, and you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber right now over on my pages on Patreon and on Substack. You can also send a one-time donation on my page on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll leave all of the information in the description below. All right, I'm gonna go feed the little man and lay him down for his nap, and then we'll get into today's video. And we are back. All right, let's get into the latest as we have Russia and China responding. They already put out a statement on this earlier this month, and now they're responding once again. Now, as a reminder, Trump did announce last week that he had selected a design for the $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense shield and named a Space Force general to head the ambitious program aimed at blocking threats from China and Russia. The program, first ordered by Trump back in January, aims to create a network of satellites, perhaps numbering in the hundreds, to detect, track, and potentially intercept incoming missiles. Now, Trump keeps throwing around this figure of 175 billion, but the Congressional Budget Office is already projecting that this project is going to cost over $500 billion in the next 20 years. And I doubt very seriously, I will be very surprised if the Trump administration is able to pull off the creation of this before the end of Trump's second term in office. They seem to think that they're going to be able to do it in the next 3.5 years. Yeah, no, every report, every actual estimate that I've read is looking at more 10 to 20 years when it comes to putting this all together. And even then, as we'll get into, there's no guaranteeing that the US is going to be able to really take on serious threats from Russia and China, especially if we're talking about the nuclear version. But it is a reminder that just as Trump was obsessed with the creation of a space force during his first term in office, now he's obsessed with the creation of this Golden Dome over America. Sounds ridiculous because it is ridiculous. I guess we couldn't let Israel have all the fun and all of the money, but beyond that, it's also interesting because this idea that Russia and China are planning to carry out an attack targeting the United States. If they did that, that would be an all-out World War III, an end of the world, I would argue, right? An all-out nuclear war between all of these major world powers would then ensue. It's hard to think of any country being able to just target, to bomb the United States as it stands right now, and for that not to end in a full-on nuclear holocaust. But it is also interesting because the US is actively waging a proxy war against Russia, really an all-out direct war at this point, especially with the latest news about removing the restrictions on the use of long-range weapons on Russian territory. It's just yet another reminder of how involved the US is. They're also planning and taking steps to wage a proxy war against China. And so to look at a scenario where the US is worried about being attacked by Russia and China, it's like, Yeah, what are you doing to them right now? What are you doing with the proxy conflicts that you're waging right in their backyard, or in Russia's case, literally on Russian territory, that would suddenly make you be concerned that they would want to target you in some sort of attack? Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova on Tuesday accused the U.S. of taking a reckless approach that directly undermines the foundations of strategic stability. She pointed to the joint statement released by Russia and China on May 8th that criticized the U.S. declaration of space as a warfighting domain. A report from the Wall Street Journal also pointed out that in order to defend itself from a potential attack from, say, Russia or China, the US would likely need tens of thousands of satellites. And Russia and China view such space-based interceptors as indistinguishable from offensive weapons, arguing that a better protected United States might be emboldened to pursue more aggressive military actions. So, in other words, once the escalation begins, it only continues to grow from there. We've seen this time and time again. And we've also seen the fact that the US is not exactly superior here, right? We as a country are not ready for World War III. The US likes to talk tough, it likes to act as though it's ready, or maybe preparing to be ready, in terms of building this fancy new golden dome with all of Trump and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio's hopes and dreams attached to it. But when it comes to technology, Russia and China are already showing the US that they have the ability to meet, if not surpass, US technology and US military industrial complex creations at every single turn. And they're also doing it faster and cheaper. I mean, just take into account the recent admission by the spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force that Russian Iskander missiles are fooling US Patriot air defense systems by performing evasive maneuvers and dropping decoys. We also saw the recent air battle between India and Pakistan, which was a display of Western weapons versus Chinese weapons. And it didn't go so well for the West. And, you look at the fights that the US is picking with countries like Russia, China, North Korea is another country that is warning the US against this Golden Dome project. All of these countries are working together. All of them have strategic partnership treaties or mutual defense treaties of some form with each other. They are allies. And the more that the US pushes towards a World War III type scenario, the closer these allies are going to get. And the US is certainly escalating tensions, as retired Admiral Mark Montgomery revealed in testimony before the House earlier this month. The US apparently has around 500 troops stationed in Taiwan. He thinks it should be 1,000, despite previous estimates that the US had 41 personnel there in Taiwan as trainers. And as reports noted, the US claims to adhere to the One China policy, which means it doesn't have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan because it's part of China. However, under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the US has armed the island to the teeth. But that hasn't been known to include American boots on the ground in the hundreds. And we've been talking about this for the last few months, right? The fact that the Trump administration wants war with China. They are escalating towards war with China, at least a proxy war of some form. Now, this is US establishment foreign policy, right? We go back to the Obama administration's pivot to Asia, and we look at the ways in which those tensions have continued to escalate ever since. But as I was noting there, it's not as if the US is just picking a fight with China. And arguably, if that's all that they were doing, that would still be a massive problem, given how much the US still relies on China trade-wise and how much the rest of the world relies on China. I mean, if the US thought that it was really picking a fight with Russia, it could have learned a thing or two from that, right? It could have learned from all of the countries around the world that rely heavily on natural resources from Russia that said, I'm not going to, put all of these sanctions on Russia, cut off my reliance on Russia. And yes, that does include countries within Europe that the US is now slapping with 50% tariffs. I still do not understand the Trump administration's reasoning, or maybe its lack thereof here. But as we've also been talking about this week, the Trump administration is also ramping up tensions with Russia actively, as you have Germany's new chancellor, Friedrich Merz, bragging this week that the Western countries supplying Ukraine with long range weapons have removed their limits on the targeting of Russian territory. And he's even telling Zelensky that Germany intends to help Ukraine with production. And this one has been interesting to watch because I remember at the start of the Trump administration, there was almost kind of a fear that what if the US gives Russia a deal it feels like it can't say no to, right? We see all of these rounds of talks. We see Russia making its demands very clear. What if the US comes forward and says, yes, absolutely, we will recognize all of these regions as part of Russia, wink, wink. We will agree to neutrality for Ukraine, no NATO status for Ukraine. We will agree to make sure that any kind of a ceasefire is monitored and not necessarily by thousands of European peacekeeper troops. What if? Well, the reality is we've seen the exact opposite of that, right? We have seen at every turn the US and the West as a whole have refused to take Russia's demands seriously. They have refused in any form or fashion to present a deal that Russia would be able to agree to. And so because of that, now you see Russia on its end like, okay, we don't have to make a deal with y'all, all right? We don't have to do this. If you're not even going to take our demands seriously, we can just continue these talks. And we are seeing more plans for talks coming up next week, which I think is going to be very interesting. That's something that I will be covering and kind of, I'm curious to see what is said and where things go, because as I mentioned in a previous video in this week's episode of Sanctioned, actually an exclusive series for my paid subscribers, it seems as though the only thing that Moscow and Kiev are able to agree on right now is prisoner of war exchanges, right? That's about what it boils down to. But Russia is watching all of this, right? They're watching the escalations. They're watching the ways in which the Trump administration tried to make it look like initially there was some sort of a break between them and Europe, right? That they were on the outs with all of these European leaders, that Trump didn't want to deal with them, that he was possibly looking at pulling back on support for Ukraine, that he just didn't want to be involved with this war. It was Biden's war. Well, look how fast things have changed. Look how fast we have gotten to this point where now we're looking around and going, oh, okay, now we see the way in which these tensions are escalating, the ways in which the US is putting the pressure on Europe to increase their defense spending, to take more responsibility for Ukraine. Sure, but beyond that, the US is still staying aligned with that. It's not pulling back on its support for Ukraine from everything that we've seen whatsoever. Instead, the US seems to be increasing tensions all around, and it is openly telling the world, specifically Russia and China, with this new plan for this golden dome. While we can sit here all day long and talk about how many years it's going to take to create it, or how many hundreds of billions of dollars it's going to require as a project, or how successful it would actually be given a potential attack from Russia or China, which I would think would be something that would be some sort of a last resort. Or even this race to weaponize outer space. All of these places where you have Russia and China openly warning against what the US is doing. And the Trump administration needs to understand that right now they look like the crazy, insane, unstable country. And the more that they pursue these escalations and tensions, the more that they talk about their Golden Dome project and all of these other ways in which they are going to keep pushing us towards World War III, the more stable and sane they are making China and Russia look to the rest of the world. And every major country outside of the European, NATO, I guess Canada, we'll throw them in there, outside of that bubble, they can all see exactly what the US is doing and exactly which world superpower they want to align with. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also catch Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.